You ever walk past someone and never really notice them? They're always there, in the same spot, same time, like background noise. In Ironwood, Montana, that someone was Joe Carter. Every morning at exactly 6:42 a.m., Joe would push open the door to a tiny diner on Main Street. It wasn't much, just some peeling booths and a jukebox stuck in a Sinatra loop. But for Joe, it was a ritual. Same corner booth by the fogged-up window, same order, same jacket, faded, frayed, and clinging to its last thread of stitching. That jacket looked like it had survived 100 winters and 1,000 stories, but no one asked about it. Joe wasn't the type who invited questions. He'd just nod at Patty, the waitress who'd already be pouring his black coffee, and slide into his booth like he had all the time in the world. He never spoke much, never stayed past 7:30. He'd read the local paper front to back, eat his pancakes without butter, and leave a folded $3 bill under his saucer. A $3 bill. Yeah, not even real currency anymore. But there it was, same as always, like it meant something to him that the rest of the world had forgotten. Most folks didn't know his last name. He was just Joe, the guy in the jacket. But then one morning, a gust of cold air slammed the door open, and in strutted Brett Hayes. You know the type, clipboard, gelled hair, Bluetooth still in one ear. City PR guy, running the Veterans Day event that week. He stomped in like he owned the place, waving a folder full of logistics and muttering about permits and stage setups. Loud, unfiltered, annoying. He saw Joe sitting in his booth and scoffed. "Still clinging to that seat, huh?" Joe didn't look up, just turned a page in his paper. Brett kept pushing. "That jacket looks like it belongs in a museum donation bin," he laughed, not caring who heard. But Patty heard, and she didn't let it slide. "That man once saved my kid's life," she said flatly, "pulled him out of the street before a truck hit him, broke his wrist doing it, never said a word, paid his tab, and walked out." Brett blinked. The joke died in his throat. "Didn't know that," he muttered. Patty didn't reply, just went back to the counter like she hadn't just dropped a truth bomb on the whole room. Later that week, Brett ran into Joe again, but this time it was at Veterans Memorial Park. The sun hadn't even risen all the way. The fog still clung to the grass, and Joe, in that same battered jacket, was kneeling in front of a plaque, cleaning it with a handkerchief like it was sacred. His tote bag sat nearby, stuffed with old rags, a thermos, and a small American flag still stiff from its packaging. He wasn't just paying his respects, he was caring for the place, quietly, faithfully, like a man with unfinished business. "Sir, this area's off limits until setup," Brett called out, trying to sound official. Joe didn't argue, just nodded and pointed at the plaque like to say, "I'll be done soon." Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a small wooden sign, blocky letters, hand-painted, "Remember them." Brett tilted his head. "Did you make that?" Before Joe could answer, a voice rang out from behind a tree. "He makes one every year." It was Ellie Grant, Parks and Rec supervisor, walking in with gloves in her back pocket. She looked at the sign, then at Brett. "And I leave it right where he puts it." Brett stammered. "Well, technically, it's not city issued." "Then issue it," she snapped, already picking up a trash bag. Joe had already moved on to the next plaque. A different name, a different story. Same careful hands, same quiet reverence. On a bench nearby, old Mr. Whitaker lifted a shaky hand in salute. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. "Still wearing that jacket?" Brett muttered, louder this time. Ellie shot him a look. Brett chuckled awkwardly. "It's just an old jacket." Joe didn't turn, didn't flinch, just pulled the collar up a little higher and walked away. Brett stayed behind, staring at that wooden sign. Remember them. The words weren't just paint. They carried something heavier. And he didn't even realize yet. That jacket, the one he mocked, that thing held a piece of history. And on Veterans Day, the whole town was going to find out just how heavy silence could be. Veterans Day in Ironwood was never flashy. No tanks rolling through town, no massive fireworks show. Just folding chairs on damp grass, a scratchy sound system, and a brass band made up of middle schoolers who tried their best. This year, Brett stood at the podium in a tan coat that looked like it had come straight from a discount catalog. He gripped the mic stand like it might run away, flipping through his note cards, trying not to mess up any more names after already calling Lieutenant Jensen Lieutenant Johnson and getting a hard stare from the front row. But then he paused, because something shifted in the air. The guest of honor, retired General Olivia Stratton, had just stepped up to the stage. Silver hair pulled into a braid, medals across her chest like chapters in a book, and eyes sharp enough to slice through fog. She scanned the crowd with the quiet intensity of someone used to spotting things before anyone else. And then she stopped, froze mid-step. Her gaze landed on a bench near the old oak tree. Sitting there, head slightly bowed, hands resting on a cane he hadn't used the day before, was Joe Carter. Jacket zipped halfway, triangle patch barely visible under his arm. Cap low, still, like a statue among the living. The band trailed off. The crowd fell silent. The general stepped off the stage. No announcement, no explanation. She walked slowly across the grass. Not a sound except the flap of the flag and the soft crunch of her boots. People started shifting, whispering. Some stood up just to get a better view. And then, right in front of Joe, she stopped. She stood at attention and saluted. Not a quick one, not the kind you do out of habit. This was precise, crisp, full of weight, full of something more. Gasps echoed. A woman clutched her husband's arm. A teacher dropped her program. And a little boy, maybe 8 years old, pointed and said, "That's the guy from the diner." Brett was frozen. His notes slipped from his hands like leaves. He didn't move. He didn't speak. The general held her salute longer than protocol. Then she finally lowered her hand and said, in a voice that didn't need a microphone, "That patch was only given to 5 men. He's the last one standing." It was like a ripple spreading through the crowd. Heads turned, mouths opened. Someone near the back whispered, "Him?" Joe didn't move. Not for a moment. Then, slowly, he stood. Straightened his back, returned the salute. Just as a single trumpet began to play taps. The bench was empty the next morning. No pancakes on the table, no newspaper spread out. But the jacket was there, folded neatly, the patch exposed this time, not tucked away, not hidden. Next to it sat a diner receipt, blank, except for the timestamp, and one name, Joe Carter. Brett walked into the diner like he was stepping into a church, quiet, careful. Patty didn't say a word. She just poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of him. He sat in the booth like it was a sacred space. Across from him, the jacket sat like a question he hadn't answered. He reached forward, gently lifting a folded napkin from underneath the hem. 5 words, written in clean, looping handwriting. Some honors don't come with ceremony. Patty finally spoke. "He asked for your usual table. Didn't say much. Then again, he never did." Brett nodded slowly. "How long have you known?" She pulled up a chair. "Long enough. Not everything has to be said out loud to be understood." He looked down again. "You told me once he saved your son?" Norman was 6. Ran into the street. Joe didn't hesitate. Broke his wrist grabbing him mid-stride. Refused to go to the hospital. Just smiled and said, "It's a sprain." Brett's fingers traced the edge of the napkin. "And you never told anyone?" She shrugged. "Wasn't my story to tell." The bell over the door chimed. Ellie Grant stepped inside, shaking off drizzle. She spotted them, walked over, slid into the booth. "Figured I'd find you both here," she said. "I've got one too." Brett nodded toward the jacket. "Go ahead. 2 winters ago, right before Christmas, a storm knocked out power across the park. I couldn't get the crew in until Monday, but Saturday morning, every path was clear. Every bench shoveled, the lanterns relit. Found the receipt later, signed J. Carter, Night Crew. They sat in silence. He never wanted a spotlight, Ellie added. Didn't need one. The jukebox behind the counter crackled and switched tracks. A slow, old tune from the 1940s began to play. Soft swing, full of ghosts and memories. Brett reached for the jacket. His hands moved slow, like he was touching something fragile. He refolded it, smoothed the seat cushion, then stood. Across the diner, a little boy raised his hand and waved. Norman Jr., grinning shyly, wearing a denim jacket with 2 tiny flag pins on the collar. Brett blinked, then nodded. He turned back to the table and picked up the jacket. "I need to find him," he said. The public library in Ironwood didn't have a fancy digital archive or biometric doors. It had old wooden shelves, the smell of floor wax and paperbacks, and one person who knew more than any search engine, Maggie. When Brett walked in, jacket tucked under his arm, she didn't even look up from her crossword. "Took you long enough," she said. Brett blinked, confused. "Sorry? Man leaves behind a coat and a riddle? Somebody's bound to want answers. Patty called this morning, said you looked like you were trying to read Braille with gloves on." He chuckled, easing up. "I'm looking for anything about Joe Carter. Articles, military records, anything." Maggie set down her pencil and gave him the kind of smile only librarians have, the kind that says they already know what you're about to find. "I was in school with his sister. Quiet family. Too quiet sometimes. You won't find him online. But drawer 6B? That's where the ghosts live." She led him down a hallway with posters for reading campaigns long forgotten. In the archive room, light filtered through dusty windows like powdered sugar in the air. Maggie powered up an old microfilm reader, loaded a reel, and pointed. "Start around 72. Look for stories by a guy named Winslow. He covered soldiers who vanished during Southeast Asia ops." The scrolling was slow. Blue-gray images flickered past. Headlines about evacuations, missing airmen, operations no one wanted to talk about. Then Brett froze. There it was. 5 rescued from Nightfall drop. Hero remains unnamed. He leaned in. The report said the pilot was killed mid-flight. A lone airman, never identified, carried 2 wounded soldiers over 3 miles of jungle under blackout orders. No night vision, no backup, just instinct. The man wore a triangular patch. It wasn't listed in official inventory. Not then, not ever. Maggie leaned over. "That's him." Brett whispered, "Why didn't anyone ever follow up?" "They tried," she said, "but he never opened the door." Later that day, Brett found a P.O. box tied to Joe's name. It led him to a modest rental behind a drooping gate, porch light out, mailbox rusted shut. The curtains were drawn, no sign of life. Still, he knocked. Nothing. He stepped back, unsure what he expected. Maybe Joe in the doorway, nodding silently, ready to explain the unexplainable. A voice called out from the neighboring porch. An older man in a thick coat leaned on a cane. "Looking for Joe?" Brett nodded. "Yeah, I work with the city." "Name's Walter. Known him since '64. He's not home right now. Won't be back today." Brett hesitated. "Do you know where he is?" Walter tapped his cane on the steps. "Sunday, 3 p.m., Veterans Section, Hillrest Cemetery. Rain or shine, that's where you'll find him." As Brett turned to leave, Walter added, "He's not hiding, son. He just doesn't need to be found." Back at home, Brett opened his calendar and circled Sunday. This time, he wouldn't be watching from a distance. At exactly 3 p.m., Joe stood alone at Hillrest, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the weathered name carved into the headstone, Lieutenant Michael Talley. No jacket, just a pressed shirt, sleeves fluttering gently in the breeze. In his right hand, a single white flower. The cemetery was hushed. Leaves drifted down like whispers. Brett walked up quietly, his own white flower in hand, and stood beside him. Joe didn't look over. Brett didn't speak. They just stood there. Two men, two flowers, one silence that said more than any speech. After a few minutes, Joe knelt and laid his flower at the base of the stone. Brett followed. Their flowers touched at the stems, side by side. Joe finally broke the silence. He was 23, had this laugh that cut through static, called me Skipper even though I was younger, kept a photo in his helmet. I never asked who she was, always meant to. Brett waited, heart heavy in his throat. "I come every year," Joe said, "because I can." Then he turned, looked Brett in the eye. "Why are you here?" Brett took a breath. "Because I should have asked sooner." Joe didn't nod, didn't smile, but he didn't walk away either. That night, in the high school auditorium, the Career Day event hummed with teenage chatter and rustling programs. The banner over the stage read, "Voices Who Serve." Parents filled the aisles, teachers lined the back. On stage, Joe stood off to the side. No name tag, just a charcoal sweater and slacks. Brett joined him, holding a folded letter. "You ready?" Brett asked. Joe didn't hesitate. "One condition." Brett grinned. No applause. Joe stepped up to the mic. The noise faded. Students quieted. The room leaned in. "I was asked to talk about service," he began, voice calm. "Not all service wears a uniform. Sometimes it's just showing up when no one's watching." He paused. "When I was 19, I carried a man 3 miles through jungle. He was bleeding out, kept saying, 'Don't stop, keep walking.' So I walked, and I never forgot it." He scanned the crowd, faces young and unweathered. "You'll be told to speak up. Sometimes you should, but sometimes you just need to shut up and carry." Not a single cough, not a single whisper. Then Brett stepped forward and unfolded the letter. "This is from General Stratton," he said. "The best heroes don't need to shout. They act. They listen." Joe Carter reminded all of us what service truly means. A girl wiped her eyes. A boy in uniform sat up straighter. A hand rose in the second row. "What did the patch mean?" the student asked. Joe paused. "It meant I went where others wouldn't." No one clapped. No one needed to. Later that week, Brett returned to the Ironwood Public Library. Maggie was already waiting at the front desk with a small brass key in her hand. "North display case," she said simply. "Left shelf." Brett followed the hallway to a quiet alcove near the back of the library. The case was glass, lit from above by a single soft bulb. Inside, neatly folded, was Joe's jacket. The triangle patch faced outward now, no longer buried in shadow or stitched into silence. Beneath it, mounted on a brass plaque, were just 3 words. "He reminded us." Brett stood there for a long time. He wasn't alone. Beside him, Norman Jr., Patty's boy, tugged at his sleeve, eyes wide. "Can I wear a jacket like his someday?" the kid asked. Brett didn't answer right away. He didn't need to, because that question wasn't just about fabric and patches. It was about legacy. It was about becoming someone who doesn't need to be noticed to matter. The thing is, Joe Carter never asked for recognition, never looked for medals or ceremonies. He didn't need a parade. He never posted a thing online. He just showed up. He carried burdens most of us never knew existed. He cleaned benches and brushed off names so they wouldn't be forgotten. He protected a kid with nothing more than instinct and reflex. And every year, with no fanfare, he returned to the same grave, placed a flower, and stood still. What some people called just an old jacket turned out to be something sacred, a symbol of quiet strength, of dignity that didn't need permission to exist. The patch, nearly invisible from wear, carried more weight than any uniform. And maybe that's the point. The real heroes, they don't need stages. They don't need speeches. They just need space to do what they do, silently, steadfastly. They remind us that kindness doesn't always announce itself, that service isn't about recognition, it's about presence, about showing up again and again, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. So the next time you pass someone sitting quietly, maybe in the same booth, with the same coffee, the same routine, look again. Really look. Because behind that silence, there might be a story worth listening to. Joe Carter didn't wear his honor out loud, but in the end, it spoke louder than any voice ever could.